Welcome back to the Athlete's Edge podcast. Last week we talked about the anchors and movement quality, but today we're looking at the engine. So we're going to unpack why athletes who are fit may even win their 2K time trial. They never stop running in their attempt to get fitter, but they aren't actually effective on game day. So why is there such a massive gap between being track fit and then being match fit?
I think a lot of it comes down to our preparation, so either the training we're doing or not doing. I think most people are training for the wrong thing. You don't train for the 2 kilometre time trial. You should be training to be a better footballer. And I don't think they're the same thing. While there might be a correlation, it's not that strong in that I think we can forget that. In my last year at the Bushies, we ditched the 2K time trial as part of a selection process. We did 1Ks, and that was because we had to probably test something when you go from 100 plus boys down to a squad, and we want to plan training off some of the back of where the group's at. But what we put a lot more emphasis on was speed, so our sprint tests. Yet, not many guys speak to are actually working on that. And I think a lot of that is because of all this talk around time trials and, pre-season AFL clubs, how'd you go when you got back? Guys are flying, they smashed their 2K time trial. That we get so caught up in that matters. Whereas when you actually talk to players and staff at these clubs, they talk about, we do it as a bit of a measure to see where guys are when they get back, but they move on for it pretty quick and they're into their high speed, tough training sessions off the back of, being more athletic and being better footballers. Because if you're training to be slow and fit with your running, you might be building a bigger fuel tank, but that's essentially pointless if the car can't get over 60 kilometres an hour. Because you're still going to get down the highway and everyone's just going to be flying past you, even if you can drive all day. So if you aren't fit for footy, the argument is you'd just be fit to jog around the field. Which in that case, you probably need to be fit because you'd be chasing arse all day.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but even we had Darcy kind of mentioned that he wished a lot more of the St Kilda players would spend less time in the off-season preparing for a 2K and actually spend their time getting faster.
Yeah, and you can understand it. So they do a 3K. So guys are so concerned with, I assume that when they get back, weeks 2 or 3, when everyone rolls back in, that, they don't want to look silly and perform really poorly, and they've obviously got historical numbers on it. Does that really matter if you train really well? Like what would Dusty Martin have run his 2K? Well, Buddy Franklin done in a 2K. Like they might have been okay, but I guarantee it wasn't their point of difference. Gary Ablett. The list goes on.
So you've spent years looking at some of the GPS units, obviously, with your time at the Bushies. And so from everyone from local to AFL pros, we always assume that the pros just sort of run more and they cover more ground, but your data says something a bit different.
Yeah, I think the myth there is that people think the AFL is brutal, because it is, but based on how far they run. Where I think things like a total distance is a bit more of the background metric. It's a bit more the result of the game and the game length. So from what I've seen, a local player might run somewhere between 10 to 14 kilometres, depending on position and the standard of footy. Like I've worn one years and years ago in Talanga League and ran 13 and a bit Ks. And I didn't feel like I ran that much. Because when you look at the breakdown, which we'll discuss, that's the point of difference. An AFL player, 12 to 15. So 10 to 14, 12 to 15, not a massive gap over the fact that even in AFL, they probably play an extra half or an extra quarter with time on and all that sort of stuff.
Top 5% who would probably go 15 to 18, but even then, that's not the majority.
Yeah, no. And I would say that in the O&M, some of like the better mids and stuff will probably be the 14 or even 15 in their games, because they're pretty good athletes and they're playing a lot of game time, and the footy transition's quick enough that they get the opportunity to run around. Where the difference is in the high speed running, and that is defined as any distance at a speed greater than usually 5.5 metres per second. So if you think of like a good tempo run, it's going to be in around the 5.5 to 6.5 metres per second. So it's the distance you can accumulate at that or higher. So it's, and then we got sprint distance as well, which is another thing that differs a lot. So what I've found is in a local game, and this is what we're talking about, it's the makeup that matters, is they might only do 400 metres high speed running of their 13, 14 kilometres. Whereas say like Darcy, he's in most games over 3,000 metres of high-speed running out of his 15Ks. So we're seeing obviously a disproportionate increase. The makeup of that total distance is in higher speeds. You throw in collisions, the intensity and the amount of accelerations and decelerations with all the changes in play and obviously in around the contest, the decision making, the higher skill requirements. It's the higher the standard, it's a lot more of a physical and a mental load. When we talk speed, this is a bit where the sort of the performance science comes in. We talk about speed reserve, and that's your max velocity you can hit if you just did a straight line sprint. So we sort of talk about 10 metres per second being sort of this gold standard, this magic number we're often chasing. So if you can hit 10 metres per second, all of a sudden running 6 metres per second, 5.5, this high speed running, is pretty easy. It's only 60%. If your max is only 8 metres per second or 8.5, then that same high speed running pace is going to feel a lot closer to maximal effort, which, as we know, we can't repeat max efforts too often. So if we raise that ceiling of speed, we make the game easier. And like I said, with the higher speed needs, with the change of directions, the skill, the mental element, you can see why I am a big believer that a lot of the training should be done with the ball when we think of getting fit for footy, as opposed to separate conditioning sessions, because most of them are straight line, sort of one pace, rest, which helps to a point. And if you're really, really unfit, not a bad place to start. But for the 80% of people that are out there doing them, I would say they're probably not necessary when they're not spending the same amount of time and effort getting their skills better, which does differentiate the levels of a footballer.
And so a lot of conversations I have with parents around what they sort of do and what their training week looks like. I do get a lot, they sort of come with me for some runs. We do like 5K park run. That's quite common. So if I'm a local player trying to get drafted and I'm just adding more 5K runs to my week to get fit, am I actually closing that gap?
Well, hopefully you would understand off what I just said that if you're reinforcing more the total distance and the lower speed capabilities, you would understand that, and if you're neglecting, I guess, the speed side of things, that the answer would be it's probably not helping. You're training to be comfortable at 3-4 metres per second when the draft board and recruiters are looking for guys that are explosive at 8, 9, 10 metres per second. And there's an element of, yes, fitness to be able to do that, recover and do it again. But as we see, why do so many guys cramp round one? They've done 3-4 months of pre-season because they haven't had the intensity. And people blame the heat, nutrition, like magnesium, but it's very little to do that. It's a neuromuscular event. It's the muscles aren't ready for what they get imposed on them, and that's because we haven't trained at the intensity. We've been doing all this volume. Now, can you do a 5K park run? Well, in the off season on a Saturday, why not? I would say if you really enjoy it. And I think there's an element too of like what you enjoy, what you're good at. If you really enjoy and find that pretty refreshing, you get out and you feel great after it and that sort of stuff, yeah. But if you're the person that sucks at running, really doesn't enjoy it, why put yourself through that when it probably doesn't help, if not hurt, all your other training that you're trying to do?
And that sort of leads into our sort of next topic, where it's training to be a runner versus a footballer. So you even mentioned before just around you do a lot of your training and sort of running in the drills with the ball in hand to get your sort of high speed meters and that kind of thing. Whereas compared to a lot of local footballers, especially having experienced it myself, it is a lot of slow, long running that it sort of takes a 20-minute dedicated running block, which takes 20 minutes, which is probably 25 to 35% of your whole training session.
Yeah, and that's like, look at the best players. What do they do better than everyone else? It's how they execute their skills. They're explosive. They win games off the back of those moments. And yes, you're going to need probably some grinders and some guys that can cover the distance and cover space and all that sort of stuff. In a basketball context, would you rather be able to run up and down the court all day, or would you rather be prime Westbrook getting up at the rim and dunking over people? I know what recruiters would be liking to see, and we've mentioned in a post before around what's easier to develop, to the point that I've heard recruiters and other people I speak to that have worked with clubs. I know one company that sort of said that they've spoken to about 12 different AFL clubs that have said pretty much we're not here to develop the speed. We try and keep our guys safe, and then we draft and trade for it. So how you enter the AFL is potentially almost your ceiling from a speed perspective for a lot of players. Now, some, if they've not much gym experience and haven't really done much running, maybe they get a little bit quicker. They get a bit more muscular and, obviously the volume of training they do. But for the most part, they're going to be doing so much footy-related volume that they're not necessarily going to get more athletic off the back of it.
So what is that doing to their ability to actually play footy, would you say?
Well, so if we talk about, like, say, more locally, if 80% of footballers are training wrong, what's the cost of that for footy? So we talk about the interference effect a little bit. If you're doing a lot of volume of slow to moderate work, you're telling your body and you're training it to basically pace and be economical more so than to be really explosive. So what starts to happen, even literally at the muscle fiber level, is you start to train your muscle fibers to be more enduring and less explosive. So when you want to be explosive, if you decide that, all of a sudden you want to train that way or want to do it, you can't just flick the switch and do it. Now you've got to kind of reverse all that and actually change your body to match that. So for me, why would you want to just lose that in the first place? We want to develop that, especially when we're younger and it's highly trainable. Central nervous system fatigue's a big one. So if you want to improve your speed, and this is also a lot in our situation, a lot of people come to us to get faster, but because they're so tired from all the training they do, essentially it's impossible, because you need a fresh nervous system to be able to produce the outputs and the speeds, basically the on-off twitching of muscles at insane level and coordinated in a way to get faster. The other thing, when we look at sort of like a week and then a month of training, we talk about the grey zone. So the intensity a lot of conditioning is done at is this grey zone where it's too fast, it's too hard to recover from quickly. So there's like a 2-3 day lag over, which is an issue when you train every 2 or 3 days. And especially if you're trying to fit gym and speed in between. It's too hard, too intense to recover quickly, but it's too slow to actually make you really fast and better. So we talk about it being this junk miles in the middle. And off the back of that, there's this mechanical cost. So if your movement becomes a bit more inefficient because you're tired all the time, you spend more time on the ground, so you get a bit sort of sluggish with some of your mechanics, instead of that real pop that we want to see when we sort of got to chase after a ball or, make a play in, say, another sport like basketball or netball, we see the ability of that to sort of deteriorate.
So how can coaches or S&C staff, I guess, get rid of the junk miles and integrate more high-speed running into their training program that actually translate to game day?
I think simple things to maybe think about is, does it have a change of pace? Is there a change of direction? Are we hitting at least 90% of our top speed? If not, it's probably a junk mile. And when I say 90% of top speed, I'm not talking about 90% effort, because you can be going slow if you're really, really tired and it's 100% effort. It's a 10 out of 10 in terms of how, like, guys on the ground vomiting. That's not to say they're not trying. It's fresh. And this is where it's hard. So if you say, well, what does that need to be? If you do a 10 metre effort, you probably need about a minute's rest. So if you get out to 30, 40 metres, you probably need 3 to 4 minutes of walk back, or very, very slow run, and a bit of a break at the end when they get back there so that they can do it again. And I bet you if anyone sort of thinks back to footy training, that would not be happening anywhere. Now, does it need to be pure speed training like that? Probably not, because we're saying above 90%. But it needs to be closer to that than further away. It can't be 40 metre effort, 5-second rest, 40 metre effort if you want 90% of max speed.
So we've all kind of been conditioned to think VO2 max is the sort of gold standard. If your number is high, you're an elite athlete, but you're saying that's a trap specifically when you talk about Ethiopian runners in that study?
Yeah, if you think of VO2 max, it's come about because of, physiologists tested something and like, yeah, cool, this is a cool measure. How much oxygen you can use in a testing situation has some relationship, but that doesn't guarantee you actually use all of it, because one, there's a mental side, like how hard can you push. The other side is when we look at, say, running economy, It's at a certain speed, how much energy do you use or not use to maintain that speed? So you could be really fit, but really inefficient. So you're going to need that fitness because you're still going to tire quicker. You could be less fit, but if you're efficient, it doesn't cost you as much to run at the same speed. So in theory, you can go longer. And that's what this study found. The Ethiopian group compared to, say, the Spanish group were faster in the 10K time trials, and a lot of these guys were marathon runners. The Spanish guys trained more and had a higher VO2 max. So they're technically actually fitter, which you would think is really important for long distance running. But what the Ethiopian group had was far better running economy. So in a sort of running environment, what that looks like, less bounce every time they hit the ground. So they're not sort of up and sinking, they're just popping every step. So they sort of stay level. So if you think of sinking in, obviously there's a cost to absorb that and then come back up so that you can get your leg through and not trip over. They're a lot more stable through areas like the trunk and stuff like that. So they're, obviously it's more efficient, a lot more elastic. And yes, there's some genetic components there, but also very trained because they run a lot from a young age. So essentially for them it came down to they weren't fitter, but they could run more with less energy leaks.
So why is this so important in team sports?
Well, I think in team sport, it more relates to repeat sprintability and, like we said, top speed and things like accelerations, decelerations. It's a lot more of that speed type training. Now, I think we can go too deep into that as well, too specific, but aerobic fitness helps with some of that recovery stuff. But if the game is played fast enough, the aerobic system is going to have less and less of an impact, in the moment. So, if you're fitter, can you do more training potentially? But that's where I would rather guys, like we said at the start, I'm not saying don't get fit. I'm saying let's get fit, but let's do it in the more context around, with the footies, with our friends, enjoying it, working on our sports skills. So we actually build an athlete that's capable of their sport. We talk about if you're going to have one elite quality, it's to be a PhD in your sport. Like, again, you don't want to be the greatest, you don't want to be Usain Bolt, but have no clue how football's played. You obviously got to be a catch and kick and do all those sort of things. Well, why not do it all together? Because what I see is, like we said at the start, is everyone's focus is on getting fit. How many guys are actually touching the footies at the moment? When we're saying you should be doing between 8 to 10 hours a week of skill work. Probably doing 4, and that's probably 4 at training. So I'd say they're not even doing probably half of what they should be doing because they spend all this time getting fit, which my argument is it's not helping them.
So if we look at the age rule, and I noticed on your whiteboard that the kids aged to 12 to 15, the conditioning row is literally 0. That's going to shock a lot of parents and athletes. So why no conditioning at that age?
I think it's the cost of doing it more so than not valuing it. So the opportunity cost. So I'd argue that for every minute a 13-year-old spends running a lap of the oval or the court is a minute they're not kicking the ball, learning change of directions, working on their shooting. What's more important? And I think when we look at longevity in the sport and the enjoyment, let's make it about the sport at that age. Like there's no such thing as an elite 14, 15-year-old. We want them to focus on their sport skills. As a result of the skills, what we're still seeing, kids that can't kick on the run, can't kick on their left foot, can't finish with their left hand in basketball, shoot the netball at under 80% in a game when it's essentially, a 3-foot shot. Like, why aren't we shooting this at 90, 95%? Because we're not practicing it. And that, I think, comes about because somewhere along the line here, we've prioritised this effort over skill. And I think it's sometimes because it's not clear on what we need to work on, and coming up with drills and speed work and that is confusing and challenging. People don't know what to do. As a result, we feel busy. We feel like we're doing something, achieving something because training's hard. But like I said, I don't think that's necessarily making athletes better. Another point there is like the skill, like we sort of said, the skill in sport is a form of conditioning because it is concentration, decision making, and mental load. If we've all done it where a conditioning sessions can be really hard, but then if you play some small-sided games, so whether that's handball footy or 3v3 on the basketball court, heart rate's up, you're sprinting, there's lots of rapid change of directions, and all of a sudden like concentration is really hard. And how many guys and girls miss basic skills? So again, we don't necessarily need to get crazy specific, but it's a factor. And I don't know if necessarily getting fitter in all this conditioning, then you throw them into those sort of drills. So like match prep at training, does it help them a lot?
And so if I'm a parent listening to this and I see my kid from the sidelines and he looks a bit unfit, what's the first thing they should change in their training week? Because obviously the first, I guess, knee-jerk reaction is to send them for a 5K run.
Yep. Well, I think the point there, so what you're seeing is probably the fact that kids lack speed, therefore they look tired because they're always chasing arse, and that goes back to that speed reserve we said at the start. So if you've got a lower speed reserve, then it means you're working hard all the time, so you're tiring quicker. So at the end of a quarter, end of a match, your son or daughter looks like they're dragging their backside around. It's maybe not because they're less fit, it's potentially because they're slower. So I think when we look at like our development window, like if we take around what happens when they leave, and go into pro sport, if we even go back to that, we look at just what happens at certain ages. If we're not really working on that speed, 16, 17, 18, and like preparing them before that, but we really want them to be peaking around then they're going to play a lot of catch up their whole career, even if they are really talented, because now they've got high level sport layered on top of all these things that they find are missing pieces in their actually athletic profile. And when speed takes 5 years to develop, but we can make someone fit in 5 weeks, I know where my priority would be. I know it's going to be with my young fella.
So the key takeaway from this episode is to stop chasing the feeling of being tired and start chasing fast and skillful.
Stop trying to win the time trial, and let's just get back to preparing for the sport, enjoying it, focusing on what really matters and what separates kids and adults at the different levels, so that we actually train what matters and guys and girls don't get disappointed when it's too late.
Stay tuned for next week, because we'll dive into how to actually structure that speed session so you aren't just running fast, you're running right. We'll chat to you then.
Sounds good.